Good afternoon, everyone. I am Christina Hawes from Wilmot's Office of Community Outreach, Engagement, and Disparities. Welcome, and thank you for joining us in our Community Conversation on Cancer, Clinical Trials 101. At the conclusion of this activity, participants will be able to explain what a clinical trial is and identify and address myths and barriers associated with clinical trials. This Community Conversations on Cancer series is hosted in collaboration with the Community Cancer Action Council, or CCAC. The CCAC is a council made up of groups and individuals interested in working together to lessen the burden of cancer within Wilmot's 27-county catchment area. The mission is to bring together the community and providers in order to improve cancer care from prevention through survivorship, by empowering the community to identify their needs and assist in creating solutions. We focus on healthcare disparities and access to care issues to ensure that all communities and populations equitably share resources. This live event has been approved for 1 AMA PRA credit by U of R School of Medicine and Dentistry, accredited by the Accreditation Council for Continuing Medical Education. No commercial funding was received to support this activity, and our presenters have disclosed no relevant personal or financial relationships with any commercial interests pertaining to this activity. Throughout our presentation, please feel free to enter any questions into the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. A Q&A session will be facilitated at the end of the presentation by Pamela Bailey, Senior Project Coordinator of the Office of Community Outreach, Engagement, and Disparities. I would now like to introduce you to Dr. Chunkit Fung. Dr. Fung graduated summa cum laude with distinction in research from Cornell University. He received his medical degree from the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Fung, held the position of instructor in the Department of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania and received his fellowship in hematology and oncology at the Hospital of the University of Pennsylvania. He received a Master's of Clinical Epidemiology from the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine. In July 2011, Dr. Fung came to the University of Rochester School of Medicine and Dentistry as an assistant professor in the Department of Hematology and Oncology. His clinical research interests are developing clinical trials to evaluate new therapies in genitourinary oncology and cancer survivorship research. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Chunkit Fung.
Thank you so much, Christina. It's really an honor to be here to share my knowledge about clinical trials and hopefully to share some information that the participant may not be aware of. And I thought to use today's seminar to do it in a very informal way and engage the community so that we can have a more interactive type of seminar so that we can make sure that we answer any questions that participants may have. I plan to talk briefly about what clinical trials are for around 20 to 25 minutes. So, and please, if you think of any questions, put in the Q&A box, and me and also Phyllis Jackson, who will follow my presentation, who's actually a clinical trial participant, I'm sure will be happy to answer that. So first, I want to talk about why should we enroll on clinical trials. So clinical trials are actually part of clinical research, and they are really at the heart of all medical advances that we see recently. For example, the COVID-19 vaccine, or the new oncological treatment that we have, including immunotherapy, which has really revolutionized the field of oncology in the past few years. Clinical trials look at new ways to prevent, detect, or treat disease. These treatments may be new drugs, new combination of drugs, new surgical procedures, devices, or new ways to use existing treatments that are already FDA approved. The goal of the clinical trial is really to determine if a new test or treatment works and is it safe. And we can look at other aspects of care, such as improving the quality of life for people with chronic illnesses. You know, people participate in clinical studies for a variety of reasons. Healthy volunteers may say they want to participate to help others so they can contribute their time and also effort to move science forward. in some cases, participants with an illness or disease, they participate to help others and also possibly receive the newest treatment to have the additional care and attention from the clinical trial staff by enrolling on the clinical study. I truly believe that, and I'm sure many of us in the clinical trial office and researchers believe that clinical trials actually offer hope for many people and opportunity to help each other and the field of science to find better treatment for others in the future. So I want to spend some time talking about the different types of clinical trial that you may see or you may encounter so you understand what clinical trial are available. So I want to talk about screening trials. So screening clinical trials are actually trials that help to detect disease or health condition. For example, there might be a new test looking at new ways to detect a cancer. So they want to see how effective this new test is, such as a blood test or any screening test, such as different ways of looking at colonoscopy, so that we can detect the disease potentially earlier and trying to prevent the disease from progressing to a point that it becomes incurable. So those are the clinical trials that look at screening tests. So there's also diagnostic tests. For example, diagnostic tests are tests or procedures for diagnosing a disease or condition. So for example, they may look at a new blood test to say how accurate is this blood test to detect a new, let's say a new cancer. Can we use this test to say, if you are positive for this blood test, we are pretty sure that you have particular cancer. So those are the diagnostic trials that clinical study may look at to say how accurate these tests or procedures are. There are also treatment trials, which at the Cancer Center, we really focus a lot on. They are looking at new treatments, as I said, say, for example, in the past few years, we're looking at a lot of different immunotherapy treatment for different types of cancer and see how effective they are for treating different cancer. They might involve new combination of drugs. For example, recently in kidney cancer, there are several new approved combination treatment to treat kidney cancer, looking at FDA-approved treatment, combining a pill and using immunotherapy. And, you know, we are very excited to say that, you know, these new combination treatment actually have been shown to be better than the existing treatment using just one drug to treat kidney cancer. So these are clinical trials that led to approval of these new combination treatment. These treatment trials may also involve new approaches to surgery or radiation therapy, looking at new surgery to treat a cancer, or even looking at radiation therapy that may be able to decrease the doses of radiation and making sure that they don't affect the efficacy of these radiation treatment, and look at new ways to improve people's quality of life. So these are all treatment trials. So these are all different clinical trials that you may see or hear about in the community. So you may ask, who sponsors these clinical trials and who helps with this? So there are many different ways that these clinical trials are being sponsored. There are government agencies such as NIH, Department of Defense, the VA, they might be sponsoring this clinical trial. So when you go and learn about these clinical trials, you might ask the principal investigator who's paying for these trials. They can be private individuals, companies, and organizations. They may also be pharmaceutical company, biotechnology company, or medical device companies that are actually studying these new medical advances. You know, finally, there can also be healthcare institutions such as academic medical center like University of Rochester and other health maintenance organizations. So I think as a clinical trial participant, you might ask the PI who's paying for this trial and how are they being sponsored. So I think these are good questions to ask. Then when you learn about clinical trials, you might also want to understand what phase these clinical trials are at. There are really many different phases that we look at for clinical trials, and you may want to understand that. So the earliest phase of clinical trial is called phase 1, that really look at the safety and dosage of a new drug. And when I say about different phases, they really focus on treatment trials, looking at therapeutic trials. They look at safety and doses of a drug. Usually the phase 1 clinical trials take several months, and they determine the dose to use for these new drugs to use. And then approximately 70% of drugs will move to the next phase if they are proven to be safe and figure out what dose to use. Then we go on to phase 2 clinical trial, which are usually smaller than phase 3, but bigger than phase 1. They look at the efficacy and side effects of these new drugs. They usually take several months to up to 2 years. And if they are found to have tolerable side effects and show to have preliminary efficacy for a disease, they will move to the next phase. And approximately 33% of these drugs will move to the next phase called phase 3 clinical trial. Phase 3 clinical trials are trials that are really the determining trial to see how efficacious the drugs are. They are usually composed of several different treatment arms, what we call randomized clinical study. What that means is that they usually compare to new drug or new treatments to standard of care, what they usually use to treat the disease. And by doing so, they make sure that the new treatments are actually better than existing standard of care. And also they compare the efficacy and safety. And what they usually do in phase 3 clinical trial is something called randomization. They would accrue patients. What they do next is they randomize them. Randomize is a process that is done usually by a computer algorithm. What they do is that they input the information of this research participant, and then they randomly assign them to one group, either the new treatments or what they call the standard of care. And by doing so, usually the PI, the research participant, and also even the sponsor don't have control over that. But we feel safe to do so because and I'm going to talk about the regulatory process for clinical trials. We feel that this is safe to do so because no matter which arm you go on, you usually have some type of standard of care arm. And then the new treatment arms usually also incorporate some type of standard of treatment with the new treatment. And these trials usually take 1 to 4 years to complete. And then based on the result of these trials, usually FDA would either grant full or approval or not grant full approval for a new treatment based on these phase 3 studies. And then lastly, there's also some phase 4 studies. So the FDA, the sponsors will collect safety data even after the phase 3 trials are completed, just to make sure that the drugs are still safe and that that they are still efficacious. So those are the 4 phases of clinical trials. And when you learn about different clinical trials, you should definitely ask about what phase this trial is in, especially for therapeutic trial. So I also want to talk about the safety process and the regulatory process for clinical trials, because I think, we really are thankful for participants to enroll on clinical study. We also have the responsibility to make sure that we can guarantee safety for our patients who are volunteering their time and also volunteering their effort in participating in this clinical trial. So I want to introduce 2 concepts about regulatory process. So first, all clinical studies have to undergo review by what we call IRB. IRB stands for Institutional Review Board. So under the FDA regulations, The Institutional Review Board is a constituted group that has been formally designated to review and monitor all biomedical research involving human subjects in this country. In accordance with the FDA regulations, an IRB has the authority to approve, require modifications, and to secure approval or disapprove the research. So when you are enrolled on a clinical study, all clinical studies have a study protocol that the study team, including the PI, some investigators, and also everyone on the research team to follow. This is like the book that we follow word by word. If we notice any deviations or any problems to any clinical research, we have to report to the IRB immediately. And a lot of the sponsors actually, they also come to the site, such as if a pharmaceutical company sponsors a clinical study, we have monitors coming in every 2 to 3 months to make sure that we are following the study protocol exactly. To make sure that the safety of our subjects to guarantee that, to make sure that our subjects are safe and we are doing all procedures according to the study protocol. Secondly, as the study progresses, we also collect safety data and efficacy data for the new treatments. So they usually, all sponsors will submit these data to a body, a committee called the Dsmc. They are called a Data and Safety Monitoring Committee. This is a committee independent of the sponsor and independent of the steering committee for the clinical study. What it does is that it will review the safety and efficacy data even before the trial is completed, and advises the sponsor, the steering committee for the clinical trial, should they continue the trial, should they stop the trial based on the safety and efficacy considerations, because we don't want to conduct a trial that we know is unsafe, or based on the preliminary data, or it shows that it doesn't work. So there's no reason to do that. So the primary objective is to assure safety for the patients in the trial. The Dsmc, the Data Safety Monitoring Committee, is composed usually of 3 to 5 members and should include 1 or 2 clinicians knowledgeable in the field of the trial, and sometimes they include biostatistic person to make sure that the data is correct. And in some situations, even a pharmacist or an ethicist. So the IRB and the Dsmc are 2 ways that we are assuring safety of our patients and making sure that the trials are conducted with integrity and according to the study protocol. So let's say you're introduced about a clinical trial. So what is the enrollment process? What does it look like? So first, you're going to learn about this clinical study from the clinical team that follows you, that actually knows about this clinical study. They will review with you the design of this study. What does this study look at? What interventions do they look at? What are some of the side effects of these potential side effects of these new treatment? What is the timeline for this study? How long does it take? So the study team should spend as much time as you need with you so that you understand the design of the study, the potential benefit and risk of the study treatment, and what does that entail for you to participate. Then you should be given an informed consent to read, and they should be provided to you in a language that you understand. And this informed consent process is to make sure that you understand exactly what you are getting yourself into by participating into the clinical study, and should be conducted by a member of the study team. You should have adequate time to review the whole document. It can be many, many pages, and you can bring it home. You can ask questions, and you should not be signing this document unless you have all your concerns and questions answered, and the study team should be able to do that for you. Let's say you decide to participate, you want to enroll on this, then the next step is screening. So usually when you go on a clinical trial, there are some tests that the clinical team, study team will need to do to make sure that you meet all the eligibility criteria before you can enroll. So don't be surprised, even if you sign an informed consent, the study team might come back to you and say, Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so, I'm sorry that you are actually not eligible to participate. But in most cases, the study team usually pre-screen you, and most cases you should be able to participate and eligible. So let's say we did all these tests, you are eligible, then the next step is registration. The study team will register you to the clinical study. And if a clinical study has 2 different treatments, you'll undergo the randomization. So those are the key steps for enrollment for the clinical trial. And for you, you should also understand that at any point, you have the right to withdraw from the study at any point. If you feel like this treatment is causing a lot of side effects, or you don't feel comfortable enrolling on this, and you have the right to do so at any point, even though you signed the document to enroll on the study. So for the last few minutes, I want to discuss some of the common myths about clinical trial enrollment. And I'm happy to answer any questions that people might have on this Zoom meeting. So one of the common questions I get asked a lot is, if I get the placebo, I don't get treatment. So as I mentioned, usually when we think about placebo, that is really the phase 3 clinical study. So usually there's a standard of care arm and there's a new treatment arm. Usually the IRB would not approve a study that doesn't guarantee our subject to have the standard of care treatment, because that's not ethical to do. So let's say, for example, we have a new drug for a cancer that really we don't have a standard of care treatment anymore after a patient failed 3 lines of treatment. So the standard of care arm may be placebo, which means that there's really no other treatment that even if the subject does not enroll on the clinical study, there's really no standard of care of treatment anyway for that patient. That's why it's placebo. But then 50% may get the new treatment. But again, we feel comfortable doing so because the new treatment has not been proven to work yet. So from the ethical standpoint, it's not unethical to test a new treatment that we don't have a standard of care treatment that has been proven to work. But if the new treatment works, that's why we have these Dsmc, as I mentioned, Dsmc to review these data. As soon as they know that this treatment actually is efficacious and work better than the placebo, they usually will stop the treatment. And then hopefully the FDA would approve the drug and we can get the people on the placebo arm to these new treatment. So I'm happy to answer any more questions about placebo, but that's the concept about placebo, is that you will still get a pill, and the placebo is something that we use if we know that there's no other standard of care of treatment that would be better than the placebo, all right? So the next myth that we get asked a lot is clinical trials are just to test out new medication for pharmaceutical companies. As I mentioned, it's very important for us to understand who the sponsors are for these clinical trials. At the same time, I can tell you in many different medical fields, a lot of the new studies are sponsored by pharmaceutical companies. You need to understand the conflict of interest of the study teams so that you understand, do they have any personal gains or anything, to gain from that? But I can tell you, as I mentioned, there's IRB really monitoring, and also the FDA monitoring the pharmaceutical companies in terms of, are they doing anything unethical, or is it safe for our patients? So, and in the real world, actually, a lot of new medical advances, especially in the oncology world, are advanced by collaboration of academic institutions like us, working with pharmaceutical companies to advance these new oncology drugs, and with the supervision from the federal government, the FDA, and then also by the IRB to make sure that we are safe. So I don't think that this is just for pharmaceutical companies. I think actually they also have an interest in advancing new treatment for a lot of our patients. So it's a common goal that we all have, and making sure that we ensure safety for our patients. The third myth I see is they are too expensive for people to join. So a lot of times when we are studying new treatments, actually these new treatments are being paid for by the sponsor of the clinical study. Also, for a lot of the standard of care treatment usually embedded in the clinical study, they are usually paid for by the health insurance company. So we don't ask for additional cost for people to join these clinical studies. And definitely that's something you can ask the study team when you enroll in a clinical trial. But I can tell you, all the clinical trials that we have, our patients don't pay extra money to participate in that. So the last thing is, you use disposable communities to test things that will be used for betterment of other communities. So I can tell you, actually, at least in the oncology field, I have been going to a lot of different committees to address the problems actually that a lot of new oncology drugs or other clinical studies in our country, we don't have study subjects who actually represent our country. They are predominantly white people enrolling on clinical trials right now. And there's a lot of initiative from the NIH and other sponsors to actually enroll more patients who are from different backgrounds to reflect who the patients that we treat. The reason why it's critically important for us to do that is that a lot of times when we look at these new drugs being approved, if you look at the population that they study, they actually are predominantly white people. And the concern is that because people from different backgrounds may actually have different genetics, they might respond to drugs differently. They might also have different safety. They may also react differently to drugs, and we don't exactly understand how these drugs may work for people from different races. So I think, to me, our goal is actually hoping to engage more people and understand the barriers of enrolling patients from diverse backgrounds to clinical studies, because that's how we move the field forward. And we are worried that these new results are actually not generalizable to people who are not white. So there's a lot of push for us to do that. So and again, I also want to go back to the to my point about how tightly regulated the clinical trial are, because of the history of what our country has done in the early 1900s about clinical study. So all these new regulatory bodies came about because we want to ensure safety of our patients. So that's a very brief introduction about clinical trials. And now I want to introduce you to Phyllis Jackson, who is a clinical trial participant, and we are so honored to have her join us, and we would love to hear her perspective and what she thinks about clinical trial. Thank you so much, Phyllis. Phyllis, I think you're muted.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Fung. I enjoyed that. It's quite educational. And thank you for having me on the panel. I am a clinical trial participant. And I think that having all of that information, I heard it before I joined the clinical trial. I am in the COVID vaccine study trial. And I entered into the study in December of last year. And it was a process. I've got all the information that Dr. Fung shared with you, about the study, what was it about, and all of that. And so because we were in such a state and COVID was just rampant and people were dying, I was prompted to actually join the study because of that. I didn't see that there was any cure. There wasn't anything out there. People were dying. As a clinical a nurse, I felt, a certain responsibility for that. As a person of faith, I felt a certain responsibility. But yet I had been, involved with committees that did clinical research, and I had worked on some studies that did not involve medication, but I had never really been involved in a study where I was going to put something foreign in my body that I didn't know about, and it was scary. But my concern about what was going on in the country, my concern about my family members, the concern about the people that I cared about, kind of with COVID, I really felt that I needed to participate. One, because I was a senior, and seniors were being disproportionately affected. Number two, I was a person of color. And people of color were being disproportionately affected. And I had some pre-existing conditions, and people with of color with pre-existing conditions were disproportionately affected. I lived in the city, and we didn't get a lot of people. Historically, people of color are not really rushing, knocking the gate down to get involved in clinical trials because of our history, because of what we've heard in the past, the things that have happened, because of inequality in the healthcare that we get presently, and because of great health disparities, and there is not a lot of trust in clinical trials. So all of those things were going through my mind, but the conditions in which I found myself in last year with COVID just really came to say, I need to do something. I need to do something. And because people of color were really, really being affected in such a disparate way, I felt that I had to take a step. And I volunteered. I signed up for it, and it was randomized control, so I didn't know whether I was going to be chosen, what I would get. But I was willing to take that chance. And so I did. I signed up. I went out. They interviewed me. They talked about it. And I was convinced I was going to do it. I got to the site. And while I was waiting to go in on my first day to get my first injection, I sat there and thought, you're nuts. What are you doing? You don't know anything about this. It's not proven. All the information that I had been given about that I knew personally from having gone through the, having to qualify for IRB and all of that went out the window. I was just like, I don't know. I really don't know. Do you really want to do this? And I think one of the key things for me as a person of color was that Dr. Branch was a researcher of color. And that tipped the scale for me. She had done a presentation to a group. I saw her. I had not known another or heard another researcher of color, Black person, a woman, talk about research really that was close to me in Rochester. I've been on conferences, but I didn't know them. But she was right here in Rochester. And I thought about that. It was because really of Dr. Branch. It was because she was a woman of color, a doctor. She was here in Rochester. I could reach her, and she was approachable. She was in the community. You could ask her any question. She didn't shy away from it. She just answered straight up. She acknowledged all of our concerns and all of the myths. And so she was the deciding factor for me as well. When I couple that with the fact that I needed to do something because my people were being affected, that's what kind of pushed me over to go ahead. And so when I sat there in that office, I went over that again and I said, I trust her. I trust her. And because of that, I'm going to go through with this. And it has been, actually, it was a painless kind of process. They gave me information. They went over all of my history. They were very thorough about that, went over all of the information that I needed to know. I was given that information. They asked me what I didn't understand, any questions that I had. I answered everything. Anything that came up, there was nothing that I couldn't ask and that they didn't answer in a way that I could understand. I teach health literacy, so it was really important to me that when they were explaining things, they used terms that I could understand, that other people could understand. So, it was one of those things where you're using a term that's a medical term, and I don't know what that means. I know what PI means, but maybe people don't know what PI means. And so I really appreciated the fact that they broke it down so that anyone could understand it. And they made it very clear that you're free to stop this anytime you get ready. That was the other thing that said, you know what, if you don't want to do this anymore, it's okay. And so that was the key for me. And then the fact that as I went on, if something happened and I was blinded, so I did not know what I got. And as COVID went on and things got worse, I was got worried and working and getting people vaccinated, and I didn't know. And one thing that assured me was, if the time comes and you feel like you want to be vaccinated, when it was approved, the emergency authorization came around for other drugs to be approved. If you want to feel that you want to be vaccinated, let us know, and we can unblind you, and then that can determine. So if you haven't gotten the drug, and then you can get vaccinated. That also reassured me that they were really caring about me, about my health and my safety, not just about their trial. So it's been a process. I got my second dose, and I see them every so often. I'm scheduled to go in. They draw blood, they ask me questions, and they're always concerned about me. They called me after I got the first one, called me after the second one to follow up on me. So I have been very pleased with that. And then I became ill in the early part of this year, and I called them, and I went in. They had me come in, and I was examined by the doctor, and we talked over what was going on with me, whether or not was it something related to the trial, was it something related to the medication, all of that. And that made me feel so secure and very, very confident, again, that they were concerned about me as a person, and wanted me to be healthy and whole. And so that was very helpful, and they followed up with me as the problem went on. We found out it probably was not due to anything of the vaccine, but the fact that they, when he said they're concerned about our safety, they really were concerned about my safety and whether or not this was a side effect of the drug or whatever. So it's been an ongoing process for me. It will be continuing over the next year or two, and I'm glad that I did it. And I hope that this would inspire other people of color to join clinical trials. I realize our history, but I also know that we can't get stuck there. And that's my message to other people. We can't get stuck in what has happened in the past because of the CE, for example, IRB, and all of these regulations and things came into place and came into be. And so we've got to trust that. I have vaccinated my children, when they're babies, and I didn't ask a question. I trusted that. I'm grateful. I came around when, polio vaccine came out. So I know the good that has come from vaccines. I know the good that have come from other drugs. I know they've been through trials, and I don't question those. My doctor gives me a new drug, I take it, and so I feel like that we've got to use our wisdom, use our common sense, pray about it, ask the questions that you want the answer to, and then decide within your own, is it worth it? Do the benefits outweigh the risk? And I think that in most clinical trials they do. So that's my story. Pam?
Thank you so much. Thank you, Phyllis Jackson, for sharing your experience and your story about participating in a clinical trial. It's just so important for people to hear the stories of people who have gone through this before. And Dr. Fung, thank you so much for your overview as well of clinical trials. I think sometimes when people hear about clinical trials, they don't even know what to think because they have no experience with it. So to hear you do sort of a breakdown of how how clinical trials run was just absolutely wonderful. So I so appreciate both of you coming today and talking. And I think what I'll do is make sure we don't have a ton of time. So I want to make sure everyone's questions get answered. So I'm going to start looking in the Q&A box and see what questions are in there. And to everyone, please feel free to go ahead and put any questions that you have into that Q&A box, and I'll get to them here. So I'm just going to look in here and I'll start fielding some questions for you. And we'll start here for Phyllis. Phyllis, what do you think can be done to increase enrollment for underserved populations?
I think talking about it and having people of color that have been engaged in trials to actually be out and be involved and be very public about it and be willing to talk about it. And also, I think one of the things that has helped is having these people come, and they have had community conversations where people come in on focus groups and the researchers come in and ask them questions and get their input. I think that has increased the number of people that are willing to go to trials, because they can ask questions and their input about how the trial is designed and all of that is taken into consideration. And I think that gives people more confidence. I think that we have to look at our own history, look at where we've come from and where we're going. And I think that having people to talk about that and not try to avoid the fact and say, well, yeah, it happened, but that was a long time. Address what has happened and just move on and say how we can move on and why it's so important that we do involve. But I think it's going to take time, and I think it's going to take consistency and engaging people, community people on boards or committees that are of research trials and research studies, and asking their input. And I think that's the key, one of the key factors about it, because I know people that have sat on these committees and made suggestions, and I know 3 of them that were part of those studies, focus groups that actually joined the trial simply because the questions were answered and they had input. So I think that's what we're going to take. And our leaders need to help, especially in faith communities, speak out and encourage people to, what you don't know, research, ask somebody.
So almost like what you're saying too is that as much as the public needs to be informed, the researchers need to be informed as well.
Absolutely.
Public. Okay, I'm going to give one to you here, Dr. Fung. And the question I have for you is about studies with alternative care that have to do with sort of alternative care. So not necessarily having a medication, but other types of studies. Do they operate in the same way as you had outlined with the different phases of studies?
Yes. So any drug treatment, in terms of any new treatment that includes, drug therapeutic treatment, they should go through the phases, especially for chemotherapy, any new pills, new infusion, they should go through all the different phases of treatment, regardless of what, such as a new pill, alternative pill that they use, they should definitely go through the same phases of treatment. And also, regardless of what medical research, they have oversight, by the IRB, and they are under the same type of regulation in all types of medical research. So even alternative treatment using a new medicine, for example, a new nutritional supplement, if you're studying it, they should undergo the same type of phases, and also they are under the same regulatory supervision by the IRB.
That's good information. And another question had come through about trials for people. Are clinical trials only for people who are very sick, or are they for people across sort of the spectrum of health?
So I can tell you, and maybe Ms. Phyllis Jackson can join in too. So they are for everyone, as I mentioned from the beginning. So some trials are for patients who have a specific illness. And a lot of trials actually are looking for patients who need certain type of performance status to enroll on a study, to make sure that they might be fit enough to enroll on a study. And for example, if you look at any new treatment for oncology, they all have cancer usually, and they don't have to be very sick. They are anyone with certain diagnosis, but at the same time, they might also be looking for healthy volunteers like Ms. Phyllis Jackson, looking at a new COVID-19 vaccine. So to make sure that, you know, we have healthy participants to get the COVID-19 vaccine and to see how safe and effective it is. So it really depends on the clinical study. Some are maybe healthy participants, some may be patients with certain illness, some might be quite sick. But that's why they look at these new medical advances to see if we can help people in different circumstances. Mm-hmm.
That's great. And there's a note here for you, Ms. Jackson, saying, I want to say thank you so much for sharing your experience, and have great respect for you participating in one of the first COVID trials. And I think that the work that you did participating in these COVID trials was just so important. I mean, people participating in those trials is what made it that so many people can get vaccinated and be healthy now. Another question to come through about fear. Were you scared at all to join the trial? I know that you had talked about Dr. Branch and how that had helped sort of helped you get into the trial, but wondering if you were afraid at all to join the trial in the first place.
I was. I definitely wanted to do it. I was, determined to do it, but I was afraid. When I got to that office, fear almost, said, you really don't want to do this. And that was just a fear of we're all afraid of the unknown. We just don't know. But I think that the risk for me outweigh, the benefits of maybe being helpful and helping something be developed outweighed the risk that I felt. I felt that there was, little. So I think that what we have to do in order to overcome fear is face it. And I think that's what I did. I said, yes, I am afraid. And a person that I read a lot says, sometimes you have to do it afraid. And that's what I did. I did it afraid. And then after I had made up my mind to do it, the fear, it kind of dissipated. It just went away. I'm in it now, and I can move forward. But definitely there is this element of fear. And the fact that I've been in clinical trials and they were oncology patients, were cancer patients. And it made so much, they were at the end, Dr. Fung was talking about the standard of care. There was nothing to help them, but our hope, the clinical trial didn't help. But on the other, the clinical trial did help because the trial medication extended that life and made it better. So that was, I was thinking about those people that I know that have been in trials and have been helped. And that also kind of helped alleviate the fear for me about doing these trials and maybe in the future, is that I know people that have benefited personally from being in these studies. And especially Dr. Fung and your bailiwick in oncology, and had family members. So radiation oncology trials. So it's just been, I appreciate the fact that these things are there and they help, and that we've got to get past the fear and actually get engaged in it.
All right. I have a question here for Dr. Fung, and the question is, do you think that anything could have been done differently in how the COVID vaccine was developed, approved, and used on the US population? I know that I don't think that you were involved so much in the development of the vaccine, but from your perspective.
Yeah, so this is a very good question. And definitely I was not involved in the COVID-19 vaccine development. But I can tell you as a physician, I have been quite impressed by how fast our country was able to develop a COVID-19 vaccine using the new technology, and how it's really helping us to overcome this pandemic, and really thanking volunteers and subjects, study subjects like Phyllis Jackson, who volunteered to participate in this study. Without them, this would not been possible. So we say thank you. So I think the facts are that the vaccines are highly effective. The vaccines, based on millions and million doses being administered now in our country and throughout the world, are very safe. I can tell you in most of the medical professional societies, even in oncology, we recommend all our cancer patients to receive the vaccine. When it came about and got emergency approval, I was the first one to line up, and we thank the University of Rochester for able to give all the healthcare workers and the prioritization first, and also all our patients in the community, and being able to deliver it to our community. So if you ask me, could it have been done any differently? I don't know how it could be done better than getting this approved and having an effective vaccine to all our community members. So I'm very impressed by this whole process. And these are the facts that we know so far. And so I don't know, Ms. Phyllis Jackson, do you have any other perspective on this? You participated in it. Mm-hmm.
I fully agree, Dr. Fung. I think it's done very well as a clinician and looking at the process. And I went back really and studied the process and realized it wasn't overnight, that it was, you know what I mean? This was based on science that had been going on for years, built on what the infrastructure that was already there. It was a lot of factors that caused this, and I really don't find any fault with it. And especially talking to people, and I do COVID vaccine education, when things started going wrong and different things popped up, which does happen. That's why we study, continue to study for safety, what things, come along that people say, well, that's because of I got the vaccine. I'm in a study that is not authorized for emergency use in the United States, but has been authorized by the World Health Organization, and it's being used all over the world. And so here I am, when things come up, you people say, see, we told you it wasn't safe. We told you it's not going to work. And that really, when you have to break it down to people to help them understand that if you've got a complication that arises, and maybe Dr. Fung, you can speak to this, you have a complication that may be related to a drug, but you have people that have taken the drug, and you've got 6 people out of 13 million. You know what I mean? And so, but people don't hear that. So they don't know how to weigh whether, well, I might be one of those 6. So what are I think that we could do more around education around that, because people latch on to the complication or the problem, and they can't put it in perspective.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And
so, then.
Oh, sorry, Ms. Jackson. I think that's
so
delay on Zoom. Please continue.
No, I was just saying that for you as a researcher, that is one of the things that, people may come up with. It didn't work, or it worked for some, it didn't work for others. They had problems, I didn't have, and now should we take it? That's a biggie, I think, with people in research.
Yes. And I think, when I talk to all my patients, every single medical treatment procedures have risk and benefit, like Ms. Phyllis Jackson said. And also sometimes you may hear in the news about these quote unquote side effects. So they might happen, but we need to understand, is there causation? It might be associated, but it might not be directly caused by the vaccine. And to me, I think for every single procedure, we have to, as a patient, as a study subject, understand what are potential side effects, but then you are there to weigh the risk and the benefit. As I look at the COVID vaccine, I think the benefit to our community of having this vaccine outweigh any potential side effects that may or may not be linked to the vaccine. But definitely the FDA is following, we're reporting all these side effects, so this continues. But about the clinical studies, I think this mRNA technology is going to revolutionize this medical field, and that and they are already looking into this technology, developing cancer vaccine. So I'm really optimistic about how fast we can develop a vaccine using this technology. It's really groundbreaking, I think.
Pam, can I ask a question of Dr. Fung, just from a process perspective around the new Alzheimer's drug? And so you talked about the approval and IRB and all of that before drugs are approved for use. And yet here we have a drug that the FDA approved for use for Alzheimer's, which people on that committee, physicians and other research, and even people that worked on the drug said, the data does not show that this drug is effective. And yet it was approved. And so, even some people quit that were on this. So what happened in this process? Because now that makes me kind of think, and I think some people will feel like we really don't have a process that's safe. If this can happen with this, could it not happen with some other drug?
That's a great question. That's a really great question.
Yeah, so, I'm not very involved in the Alzheimer's drugs, but I understand your question about the process. So
Right.
My understanding is that the controversy about the Alzheimer's drug is that it has been shown to decrease a substance or affect the level of a substance that might cause Alzheimer's, all right? But it has not been shown so far that it actually decreases the symptoms or manifestation of Alzheimer's disease. So that's where the controversy is. And my understanding is that I have to look at it for the Alzheimer's drug. I don't think it's a full FDA approval yet, is it? I don't know. I have to check on my facts. Do we know, Pamela or someone?
I only know from
No,
listening to the news. I thought it was approved.
It was fully approved.
Yeah.
But so I think it just, when you have a rare disease,
Yes,
it
it's
doesn't
approved.
have a good treatment. I think that's how FDA weighted its decision on it. They said, we really don't have any other treatment. So if it can decrease a substance that has been associated with Alzheimer's and has minimal side effects, I think that's likely the reason they approved the drug. But definitely, again, we need to, as physicians, we discuss with our patients. A cancer drug approved doesn't mean that it fits for everyone. What I do as a physician is to talk to them. What are the data here? What does it do for you? What are the safety? And I believe that every single patient, every single subject has the right to know the risk and benefit, especially for disease that's not curable, that a disease that we hope to relieve your symptoms and extend your life. But so I think it's a discussion again. It's the same controversy about PSA screening. Do we screen people for prostate cancer using PSA? It's the same concept about using a cancer drug that might extend a little bit of life, but causes a lot of toxicity. It's FDA approved. So do we go about doing that? So I think when we talk to our physicians, when we talk to our healthcare team, you have the right to understand what that means. So I think if a patient understands that FDA approved the drug because it helps to alter a substance that may be associated with developing Alzheimer's, but doesn't really improve your symptom. It might incur cost, it might have other side effects. So it's really a personal decision that the patient has with the providers. What I'm happy to see is that patients, physicians, and FDA are very transparent about what's going on.
Right.
The physicians are very transparent. If they don't agree with something, they speak up. It's on the news. So it's not like something that's being hidden. It's being broadcast widely. So I think that's what makes me more confident about the process, that they're not hiding anything.
I hate to stop this conversation. This is just so great. And I think we need to have a clinical trials 201 with everybody, because this has really been absolutely wonderful. There's actually a few more questions as well. Yeah. So, but what I'm going to do is I think our hour is done. So we unfortunately have to stop here, but we do have more questions. And what I'll do is send them to Dr. Fung and Ms. Jackson. And hopefully we can have some of those questions answered as well and be able to send them out to everybody as well later. But thank you both so much. This was absolutely wonderful. And I hope you don't mind, you may get another request to come back, because this is so great.
This is great. This is great.
It is great. Thank you. Dr. Fung, I definitely would like to have another one, because there are some other questions too that I think can help move forward people's confidence,
Yeah.
in entering trials, and the way that you've explained it and helped. I think it's definitely more.
No, thank you. And I also want to thank Christina, Pamela, our interpreters, and everyone who attended this meeting. I think it's so important for us to engage the community, to really have a discussion, honest discussion. If we don't know, we don't know. Like I said, I don't know about Alzheimer's drug, but I'm transparent about what I do know, and I'm happy to share. I think we need to trust each other.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. And Christina will be.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Christina will be sending out the email with the follow-up video
Okay.
soon. So thank you.
Bye-bye.